This is the answers to the Chapter 10 Quiz 1 review. The first question I asked, given this equation, find the line of symmetry. Remember, the line of symmetry is the opposite of b divided by 2a. So I will substitute b in and 2a. When I simplify, I get positive 2, and that would be my line of symmetry on a graph. Using that same equation, and a line of symmetry of positive 2, I now can find the vertex. If x is 2, I substitute that into the given equation and solve. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. 16 minus 3, I get 5. My vertex is 2, 5. 2 again is the line of symmetry. After I find the vertex, I find the roots. This looks like a goofy quadratic equation, not one I could simply factor real fast, so I'm going to use the quadratic formula. I'll put b opposite of b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac. Be very careful with all of the negative signs. The subtraction sign here and the negative sign here need to be included underneath the radical sign. All over 2a, again, be careful with the negative sign. Simplify the radical, I get 40. So I have negative 8 plus the square root of 40. All of that, the sum, divided by negative 4. Negative 8 minus the square root of 40, the difference, divided by negative 4. Be careful with your calculators. If I give you this equation, and if I asked you to graph, the question was, would that have a min or a max? Remember, a quick way to do that is to look at the a term. If a is positive, it is smiling, therefore it would have a minimum. If this was negative, it would be a frowny face with a maximum. This looks peculiar, but we can handle it. I gave you this equation, and I'm going to ask you to start working with it. First, we need to put it in standard form. The first thing I did is FOIL. I ended up with x squared plus 6x plus 9. Then I set it equal to y by adding 2 to each side. Now I have an equation I'm familiar with. I'll find the line of symmetry, the opposite of b, divided by 2a, and I end at negative 3. I will then use that line of symmetry to find the vertex. If the line of symmetry is negative 3, I put that in for x and solve. I end with a vertex of negative 3, 2. Just to review, a is positive, it'd be smiley, so we have a minimum. I asked you to find the roots from this equation. I looked at it, doesn't look straightforward to factor, so I went right to the quadratic formula again. The opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I always simplify under the radical sign first. Then I would have negative 8 plus the square root of 8 with the sum divided by 4. Negative 8 minus the square root of 8, the difference divided by 4. I asked you to solve for c. You take half of the b term, square your answer, that becomes your c. This one I asked you to solve by using the square root property. One thing I noticed is, ooh, that's a perfect square. That's a perfect square. So I did a quick test for b. Is 4 2 times the square root of a times the square root of c? And it is. So the square root of the first term, the square root of the last term, sign in front of b. Take the square root of both sides. I have r plus 2 equals positive square root 7. R plus 2 equals negative square root of 7. Subtract 2 from both sides and solve. I have roots of 0.6 and negative 4.6. Solve by completing the square. This is not a perfect square, so I move it to the right-hand side. I do the 3 steps, half of b squared, put it in the equation. If I add 36 to the right or the left, I have to also add 36 to the right. Now I have a perfect square trinomial. Combine my terms, take the square root, be careful on the calculator, and solve. I asked you to use the quadratic formula on this. The only trick part to this was all of the negative signs. Be very careful. The opposite of b is positive b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I again like to simplify what's under the radical sign. I write it as 2 separate math problems. 8 plus the square root of 24, the sum divided by negative 4. 8 minus the square root of 24, the difference divided by negative 4. When you are asked to find the discriminant, you do not use the radical sign. It is b squared minus 4ac. Given this equation, I need to put it in standard form before I start substituting in for a, c, and b. b squared minus 4ac, I end up with 1 plus 64 to get 65. 65 is positive, so there are 2 real roots.